So you, for this website, used the distill package, and I'm curious, there are multiple approaches if you want to make a website from R. There's Blogdown, probably some others that I'm not thinking of, but there are different ways to make kind of websites or HTML documents. Actually, even Bookdown, for example, I was giving a presentation the other day on Bookdown, and I was thinking like, there's no reason why you can't make a website with book. I mean, that's all it is, just a series of HTML files. Anyway, I'm curious why you opted for Distill to make your website versus any other package.
Um, I think when I started design this, so this was like fall 2022. I think when I was first building it, Distill as a framework had some really nice features and flexibility that I liked. Some of the really sort of simple things that are on the website, like having little text in the margin of a web page, that's like built in. That's like a CSS class built into Distill, or the way that you can size or resize images and other sort of layout type stuff that you certainly could do manually in CSS and HTML, but like a lot of that was built into Distill already. So it seemed like a pretty good framework that could do enough of the formatting that I would want to do, but sort of all staying within Distill. I think at this point now, like almost 2 years later, I might consider building it in Quarto or Quarto, I guess that's how it's pronounced. This like
Yeah,
new sort of multilingual products from our studio, I guess, that has a lot of some of those same features of like HTML layouts from Distill, like the image sizing and the page sizing and the text callouts and a bunch of other nice stuff is also built into Quarto with some other features. So I might consider using that as a platform.
yeah, that makes sense. I know I've always personally gone with Distill. I've never actually done anything with Blogdown, which is the main other one that I hear people talk about, but I just hear people talk about like trying to update something and like breaking their site or that kind of thing. And Distill is really much more straightforward, it seems like, for
I,
that type of
I
thing.
think so. And for me, just understanding how it worked, like each page is its own R Markdown file that gets rendered to an HTML file. And there's a little bit of like YAML configuration that tells you where to put everything. And other than that, so yeah, like you said, it sort of seems pretty straightforward and simple, which again, as not a web developer, I really like.
R- Yeah, that makes sense. So just looking at the website, it's got a few different pages. We're just looking at the home page. It's got new cases. It's got a little table here that gives kind of a summary. And then it has links to, or it has a map here, but it also has, and are these municipalities or are these,
Yeah,
what are
yeah,
these
towns
called?
or municipalities.
Towns. Okay. And then it has links, and these are links to the same links that I assume that are up here. So for example, if I looked at it by, looks like Westchester and surrounding counties, we got general data here, metro area going, that's going beyond Westchester, right?
Exactly. Yeah, Westchester is that like odd shaped county in the middle. Then we have like New York City, the New Jersey suburbs, the Connecticut suburbs all around it.
Gotcha. Um, cool. So you have all the data from schools. Um, so I think the main thing, like when I looked at it before we talked, just to highlight there's a ton of different data sources that you're using, that you're bringing together to report on, in one place, which is kind of amazing that you can do all that and bring it in. So in nursing homes, you had schools before, all that, all in one place. Is there anything else like what are there pieces you think to highlight in terms of just the website itself before we talk about the kind of code?
Uh, well, I would say one thing that I really like about websites or even just like R Markdown or literate programming, whatever you want to call it, is the ability to mix, in this case, for like an audience, mix text with charts, visuals, and a sort of flow document. And I think in part that's because people absorb information in different ways. So to be able to have similar information in this paragraph up top here, um, and you could glean similar information from the table or from the plot below, but some people prefer it in text and some people will prefer it visually. And so the flexibility to do that, I really like this sort of HTML format for that, because um, all the text here is also generated dynamically. Also, so I'm not manually writing any of these numbers in. And so
Right.
being able to have dynamically generated or dynamically changing text connected to the charts, connected to the tables, makes it so that it's sort of possible to create these templates and these documents that have those different modalities of communicating data. So I think it's a really like powerful tool for websites, for reports, and lots of different applications.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And you have so many different types of visualizations too, right? Like you have this, but then you also have, a choropleth map, that visualization. That one's actually that's static. A
Yeah,
lot of the other ones are interactive.
that's ggplot, the static map plot. But I
Uh,
think, yeah, the other nice thing about doing a lot of this work in R is, like I said, it wraps these JavaScript libraries. So these maps are made using Leaflet. The
right,
charts up there are Plotly, and it's not like a ton of interaction. It's not like a big scrolly telling thing or like a fancy thing you
sure,
might see from like a data journalism organization, but they have enough interaction that makes it feel like a dynamic experience and a little bit more useful than just static plots. And in a lot of
right,
cases with R, like especially with Plotly, it's almost as simple as your same ggplot code. It can, using the ggplotly function in Plotly, can more or less translate that static plot that you might be familiar with making into a dynamic plot, an interactive plot like this that you could hover over. That again makes it a little bit easier to interact with the data and feel more like a website, which it is.
yeah. And it takes advantage of the medium, right? So you're doing what HTML does best, which is people can like hover over. I mean, it seems really simple, but being able to hover over and see, okay, on January 5th there were 4,175 cases. Because if it's static, I mean, one of the things I always think about is like, do do I need to label things? And obviously you can't label every data point or that would just get totally chaotic. So maybe you selectively label, but when you make it interactive like this, you don't have to, add annotations. You can just, let people hover and get that interactivity to see specific days if they want to do that, which is really nice.
Absolutely right. You can sort of encode a lot more information than you can in just one visual. I will say one thing that I've actually been um, doing more recently and been more interested in is the accessibility of some web visualizations and interactive plots. And I know like hovering and tooltips with some JavaScript libraries are hard for people using screen readers or other
Mm,
technologies to use. So actually, I've transitioned in my work right now that generates the interactive plots like this in HTML to use the high charts library,
huh.
high charts JavaScript library, and there's a package for R called high charter that similarly, like to Plotly, like wraps the JavaScript library in R. And high charts has a pretty strong focus on building accessibility features and tools into interactive plots. And so you can enable an accessibility module that allows you to navigate using a keyboard through many elements of a
Huh.
interactive plot, and also, set text if you're using a screen reader that would display at different points.
Wow. That's great. I did not know that. Super great. Um, One other thing I want to highlight here is you use these nice tabs so that people can, you can have multiple charts here, but not display them all at once, and people can, click through to see them. That's a really nice interactive feature I think that you've added.
Yeah, and I think
That
again
works
that
really
that
well.
to your point of like trying to use the medium, like we have we have these tools in HTML and CSS that can do this. So instead of just having a really long page, I already have a pretty long page that you can navigate with that menu bar on the left side, but I don't, to have 4 of the same looking plots like stacked on top of each other would be a lot. So this is a nice little feature. And I'll also note that you notice that the section where this plot is a little bit wider than where the text is. And that's one of those features from Distill that I was mentioning earlier that lets you determine the sort of width of a figure output from R. And again, that's totally stuff that you can do in HTML and CSS, but it's built into Distill, and there's a CSS class that will define the width of your figure, which is a nice little feature of Distill. And I think Quarto has that too.
Cool. I'm just making a note so we can make sure to show that in the code. Actually, talk briefly, if you wouldn't mind, about the tables, what you use to make the tables, because they all look very consistent, look very nice. So how did you make those?
Yeah. I actually don't even remember which package I used for that. I've used tables in R are like, there's so many different ways to make interactive tables. There's like DT, there's React. Is this a reactable table?
I think it's DT, but
okay. I can here pull it up real quick. There we go. Let's find out.
I've had that same experience where someone asked me something about my code, and I'm like, I gotta look.
Let's see.
Yeah,
here's the table.
I think.
Yep, I think that's the spot. Here it is. Yep. So it's DT. Yeah, which is a wrapper as a data tables. I believe that's the JavaScript library. Yeah, I've sort of gone. I haven't landed on a table R package or JavaScript package that I like always use. So I've used DT here. I think more recently I've used Reactable, but they all do similar things. I mean, the main things that I like in a table are having it be sortable. And so you can click on any of the column names here and you can resort it up or down by a certain type. So here we can see like what day, here are the top days with the most cases that were both in January of 2022. That's a nice feature. The scrollability, like some tables, you can either decide to have it just like scroll endlessly like I have here or have it paged. I think when I initially built this in 2022, I wasn't necessarily, or I was hoping that I wouldn't have it be up for 2 years and there wouldn't be this many rows. So I potentially would have made different decisions, but it works. We have every day from the beginning of the data collection till now that you can just scroll down. And I think this little, there's a nice little feature in DT that when you hover, it highlights the table, the row of the table.
The row.
These are just like nice little features that are built in.
Yep.
And I think in part, I cribbed some of this style from 538. I really like the tables design at 538. And so some of that is where I got, are there some formats?
So, well, the thing I was thinking about was I was talking to Tom Mock for another chapter in my book about tables, and he made a package. This is for static tables. It's called GT Extras, and it builds on the GT package. And he has a theme in it to make 538 looking tables. So I was thinking, oh yeah, that does look really similar if you look at that and that.
Yeah, totally. So right, I think I used like all caps in my header there, and I think I have the the numbers in this table I think are in a monospaced font, which makes it a little easier to read and compare.
Yeah.
Yep. So those are like nice little things that I just pick up from I read a lot of journalism and data journalism, and that's the sort of stuff that you pick up. And one nice thing. So like if you go all the way over to the right side, the total desk column, if you use a monospaced font in a table, it's all like it's all lined up no matter what number,
Right.
the total number. So that's like a nice little thing that I probably wouldn't have thought of my own. And I'm not like into typography and typesetting that much, but
Right.
that's a nice little feature. And with all of this in doing this in HTML, you can use any font you want. And so a
Sure.
lot of the ways that I probably, when I was initially sort of building the design or theme for this table, I'm sure I went to some 538 table that I liked, right clicked on it, inspected the element and saw what fonts they were using and the alignment and all that stuff.
That makes sense. Cool. Well, let's go. So we actually went like pretty granular, which is fine. Let's take a step back and go really big picture. So I'm going to close this. So just going back here, one thing, you have added the nav bar a link to GitHub, which will take you to the GitHub repository that is all the code that builds this site. So maybe if you can start out just kind of like walking me through how this whole thing works, what the various directories are for, different files. Maybe let's start with like, where does the data come from and how do you kind of access that data?
Yeah, so that will be in the R folder, has all of my R scripts, and I have it split into a couple different folders. The build folder has scripts that are related to generating the website, using the distill format that we talked about.
Hmm.
But the data piece comes in those other two folders. So we have data raw and pull. Data raw folder has scripts that I wrote initially to pull data that already that existed like in one place at some point. Not data that is updated regularly. So to start building the website, I knew I needed to get some like census data. I knew I needed to get
Sure.
some actual like shape files to build the maps. And so that
Like for this kind of
exactly.
thing.
So I knew I was going to, in a couple places, I wanted to make a map. So in order to make the map, I actually had to get those polygon shapes. So there you go. Get municipality polygons. This is reading data from my county's, I think their Department of Health. They have an ArcGIS, like an open data portal. And so this relies on the SF package for dealing with spatial data in R. And it's a pretty straightforward script here, but essentially I'm reading this GeoJSON file in line 6. That's a file that's publicly published by my county that has the boundaries of every municipality. And I use the next step there. The read SF can read in GeoJSON or any number of like geographic files. And then I do some light data cleaning there. I'm also in the next block of code starting on line 13, I'm getting some census data using the tidy census package. Because I needed some population estimates for each town, and those are not published by the county. So I had to do some custom tabulation there to essentially get a denominator for the site, because I knew I wanted to publish rates
Right.
of I knew the number of cases in a given municipality, but I also needed to know the total population there to calculate a rate.
That makes
And then
sense.
the last step here is just sort of writing that back out to a cleaned up version of the file that I'm going to then use later when I generate the website. So I think, yeah, both a CSV file that had, I think, the tracked level data combined with municipalities, and then also a cleaned up GeoJSON file, which then I'm going to use when I create the maps and read back into R and then use Leaflet and use those polygons to actually build the maps.
Gotcha. And it looks like you write all those to the data folder. So if I go up here and look at the data folder, I can see, for example, that is one of the files, the municipality polygon file that we just saw. That, well, I can even see you wrote that 2 years ago. So when you first started working on this, and it's saved
Exactly.
here.
Yeah. And like I was saying, so there's a mix of data here that I collected one time that like isn't going to change, like the polygons that I need to use for the maps. But then
Sure.
other stuff, I'm collecting, every day or every week whenever it's refreshed. So if you, um,
Yeah. Oh,
no,
sorry.
that's fine. The first two CSV files in this directory here, one was updated yesterday, one was updated today, of data that I'm pulling down from other public sources. And this is stuff that has like current live um, COVID data reporting.
Gotcha. So I can even see, yeah, it goes down to yesterday, June 6th. So let's go actually back then in the R. So you said the data raw, this is all these files pretty much get that kind of data that's not gonna change. So I'm assuming the poll then is where you're getting that data that does change. So what would be a good one to look at?
Um, I think we could look at the whole NYT cases deaths. Um,
Okay.
should be a pretty straightforward one. The New York Times has done a lot of great data collection, and they've made all of the, almost all the data that they have collected and published is available on their GitHub page to download. So for this script, what I wanted was, this is the data that generates the map of the metro area of different COVID rates by county. And so this is not just
So
Westchester.
so that would be
Exactly.
this? No.
Yep.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So each of these polygons here is a different county in the New York City metro area. And I think, is there a
Gotcha.
table below it? I can't remember now. Yeah. So a
Yeah.
table below where we have the average daily cases. I think this is within the last 2 weeks, I believe, and total cases and total population by county. And so the source of this data is like I said, the New York Times, where they're collecting this each day. And so the URLs up on line 4 are the actual URLs to the CSV files that the New York Times publishes on their GitHub page, and they update those daily. And so what I do is I update my version of that daily. And this script is more or less, all we're really doing is taking all of that county data for all 3,200 counties in the US, but I just need the ones in the New York metro area. So like from line 6 to 11, I'm just defining what are the counties that I'm going to use for my map that
Hmm.
I'm defining here as the metro area. And then I read in that
Right.
whole big county, every county in the US, and then I filter it down to just the ones that I want.
Gotcha. Just out of curiosity, so URLs, um, wait, does that create a vector then? Is that multiple
It is. They
URLs?
actually just changed this a couple of weeks ago. I just discovered this. The CSV files that they had been publishing were getting too large for the GitHub file limit. So it
Hmm.
used to be that the county level data had like one row per day per county. And they
Yeah.
had to split it into 3 files, one for each year. So it would be a little bit smaller.
Uh-huh.
So initially it was just one file, but then I recently discovered that now it's 3. So that code at line 4 is creating a vector of 3 URLs to those 3 different CSV files. And then the most recent version of readr actually will
Hmm.
uh, read a vector and combine it under the hood.
Oh,
So at
wow.
line 13, I'm just calling read CSV for these 3 different files, and it's smart enough to like combine them all into one.
Gotcha. So it gets the 2020 data, reads it in, filters for only the counties you care about, gets the 2021 data, 2022 data, and merges or binds those all
Yeah.
together.
Well, I think it actually probably reads in each year all together in that line 13, and then it will filter it. the whole thing. I
Oh,
think
okay.
that's the order. Yeah,
Cool.
it's like a shortcut for you might have used like the per package using like map underscore DFR would do a
Right.
similar thing, but I think they just built that in under the hood of Read CSV in the most recent version of ReadR.
That is good to know. All right, cool. And so then um, you clean your data. I'm not going to actually go into too many of the details, just so we keep the focus kind of on the website portion of it. But then you end up spitting that data out into data county cases deaths MYT, which is the file that we looked
Exactly.
at.
Yeah. And the other thing that I ended up doing is I put, if you see at the top, like at line 2 and then line 33 and line 34, I print a little
Hmm.
bit of information. And I did this because I thought and I decided I was going to use this script in an automated way that I could run daily or however often I wanted. And I might want to create a log file where I could see information. So
Mm,
when the script starts running, it prints the time and it just says starting download of New York Times data. That's line 2. And then on 33 and
right.
34, it will output um, the time so I can sort of see how long it took. And then it also will say the most recent date that the data was available. So in a log file, I can easily see like, and over time, these websites have changed their URLs or they've changed how they publish data. So
Sure.
it's a good tool, like for when I was running this automatically each day to be able to find if something changed or if there was something wrong.
Cool. So each of these files kind of does something similar where you're going out and you're collecting data from some data source. Is that right? Or is there anything that does
Yeah,
something
no,
different
and,
in
and
these
and
files?
like you said a little while ago, there like all this data is published by different places. So like the New York Times, the New York State Department of Health, the New York State Department of Education, like the CDC, like so each script sort of has a different data set and a different data source, but the process is always the same. Like go out somewhere on the web, pull the most recent version of it, do a little cleaning, getting it into the right shape that I want, and then saving it back to um, somewhere that I can use it to generate the website.
Gotcha. Cool. So that's how you're able to kind of bring in all that data. And again, like it ends up in this data folder, which has all of the data updated. And again, like the New York Times data is updated recently. Some of the other stuff is updated 2 years ago because obviously, like municipal boundaries don't change, or at least not that often. Um, so let's see. Let's talk about what else is here. Um, I'm just thinking if there's anything else to talk about before we move to the actual website portion of it. Anything else I should highlight?
Um,
And I do, sorry to interrupt you. I do want to talk about the like how you automate it with GitHub Action, but I want to actually save that kind of to the end.
okay, yeah. I mean, the only thing I'd say is just to add on to what we were just talking about. I think the workflow of having scripts that will pull your data, clean your data, save a clean version of it in one step, and then your next scripts
Hmm.
do something else with it is a useful workflow in lots of different lots of different applications for R. If you're doing research, you probably have a flow like
Mm,
this too, where instead of trying to shove everything into like a giant script, which is how I used to do things, like that would be thousands of lines and go
yeah,
like from top to bottom this whole thing, breaking it out into like little, to me, in my mind, logical chunks can make it a little bit more manageable and easier to sort of track changes in your code or sort of figure out
right.
where you need to go if something is going wrong.
That makes a ton of sense. Yeah, so you're separating out the kind of bringing in the data from the then reporting on it in the website, which we're going to show in a second. One thing you do, I'll just highlight here, is the source line one. So if I go into R build, what was that, attach packages. So this R script file, all it does is load the packages that you need. And so you have written one script file that does that. And then I saw, for example, on this R script file where it brings it in, it sources that, it runs the code from there. And if I look at like CDC, the CDC vaccination data does the same thing. So that's also, I think, a really nice way that you've kind of broken it up to have separate files and also not have to copy things
Yeah,
over and
right. I
over.
try to, and I'm sure there's better ways to like design a super modular project, or like I know a lot of people use the targets package or other sort of make like packages for doing this, but
Right.
this is sort of like a slightly simpler version of that I find is really flexible, and like I said, it makes it easier for me to know if something's going wrong with the CDC data. I can pull up the CDC, like the place where I pull in and clean the CDC data, and I'm like right where I need to be.
Makes sense. Okay, cool. Well, let's talk about, um, so there are a few other folders. Actually, I don't even, oh, the docs is that's where the site gets built. Well, I actually maybe come back in a little bit and talk about these two folders, but let's actually go into the site directory, because that's where the code that actually puts together the website exists. So maybe I'll start out by just opening the index.rmd and have you kind of talk through, or actually, yeah, I'll start there. If you want to talk about other files, just let me know and I can show those as well. So do you want to
Sure.
talk through how
Yeah.
this
So
works?
this is the homepage of the site, and as we mentioned earlier, with a distill website, each website or each page is just a separate R Markdown file, um, which again is like if you haven't built a website using R, but you have built other reports using R Markdown, it's really the same thing. And we're just using the distill output format here. So that top, header, YAML header is just a little bit of metadata about the site that gets converted into, I think, the description of the website, and then we're sort of stating that this is going to be a website made using the distill website function from the distill package, so that everything that follows here is going to use that distill site generator. You could you could change almost like the output format to like a different HTML format or some other R Markdown format and get almost the similar results. Which is another reason that like R Markdown is so amazing, that like the same code within this whole document could be used to build a website or a PDF file or a Word document.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, I've seen people who have made kind of reports with R Markdown in PDF or Word or whatever, and then they'll want to make some slides, and they'll just be able to use that same code to output slides as well, which is pretty cool.
Yes.
Um,
Well, and then I guess
so go ahead.
the rest of the code in here is generating each of the elements that we saw on the homepage. And so there's one main plot at the top, and then there's some text, and then there's a map. And so each of the code chunks here are doing one of those elements.
So if I even look, let me go back to the homepage. So this is new cases reported. So yeah, I am in the right place, just making sure. So this code here is actually what's making that
Exactly.
plot.
And actually, this is an example of where I designed the plot using ggplot. So like lines 73 to 183 are just sort of straight up ggplot code that you would use to make a static plot. And then there's a function in the plotly package called ggplotly that does a really nice job. It doesn't do everything, but it does a really good job of
Sure.
most plots that you build in ggplot. It translates that into ggplot or into plotly for you. And then plotly translates it into this JavaScript. So with actually all of the plots on this website, since they were all relatively simple, like line plots, I knew it would work pretty well. And I was more comfortable with the sort of the flexibility of ggplot and the axis labels and the text and all the stuff that is so great. We love about ggplot because it's so flexible and you can really tweak all these elements. And then I I knew that ggplotly would turn that into this interactive version relatively easily.
Yeah, definitely. Um, talk a bit about you talked before about how you can make certain things wider. Actually, maybe this might not be. Let's go on. This page, for example, is where you talked about it being wider. So I'm going to go to the county page. Fine. So this is the code. It's actually really similar where you're making your plot with ggplot and then converting it to plotly. But talk about how you actually made it so that this output is slightly
Yeah,
wider
yeah.
than
So
the
this is we
text in it.
mentioned a couple of times a really nice feature of distill. At line 38, you can see in that knitter chunk, I define layout to be L body outset, and that's something that's built into distill. That there's different figure widths, and there's I can't remember what they're all called offhand, but they're sort of you can do a full page width, partial outset, and that just sort of uh, we'll extend it to a different CSS grid. Yeah, I think in Distill there's like a figure. There you go.
Figure. I visit
There
this
we go.
page a lot actually, because I can't remember
Exactly.
them
So
either.
screen,
Right.
L
L
page, L
screen.
body outset. Right. Exactly. So yeah, this is a nice thing of like the same R code can generate. You can place it sort of in the page and have it be the width that you want. Again, not having to mess manually with any CSS here.
Yeah, totally. Cool. Let's talk now a bit about like we can even talk here. Like we've looked mostly at this point at the graphs, and so you're using R Markdown for graphs. You've broken it up so that you do the data manipulation, bringing data in from multiple sources, and then you basically just use R Markdown for the reporting, which I think is a really nice way to do it. We've talked about the graphs. Let's talk a bit now as well about text, because you said, you're not like you didn't go on yesterday or 2 days ago and manually write that. So how does dynamic text like this get
Yeah. So
written?
this is another great R Markdown feature where I'm essentially writing a template. So on is something that I wrote, and you'll see as a text. But then the next part, June 5th, 2022, that's dynamic because I want that to change. So here we go. And so with our Markdown, I have this mix of text that I write and then dynamically inserted information from R. So this is like, yeah, this is a long line here, but just that first to how to get it to say on June 5th, 2022. I have a data frame called recent in here, which is the most recent data from New York State. And then there's a column in that data frame called date. And so I know that the date that's in that data frame will be the most recent data that is going to be displayed in the rest of the plots because I'm using that recent data frame as the input data for all the plots that go down. And so what's happening there on line 29, it's just pulling that date out of the recent data frame, and month underscore day underscore year is just a little formatting function to make it say, in words, June 5th, 2022. But you could have that formatted however you like. And you can see it's offset by these backticks. And then there's a backtick, then it says R, which means I'm going to write some R code here, and I want what is displayed on the website to be the output or the result of running this little chunk of R code.
Gotcha. So then we end up with, on June 5th, 2022, 216 people tested positive, which is that, but after the R
Exactly.
code is actually outputted,
And
which
yeah, and
is
I mean, and this
great.
is like this works the same for a website or for a report or anything. And it's, I think, one of the really powerful pieces of R Markdown. And like I said before, it really helps when you want to try to communicate uh, in different modalities, and you want to write text, and you want to have charts, and you want to have tables, and you want to have
Right.
them all match, and you don't want to do it manually. Well, this is the way to do it because they're all using the same data frame input, and then the output is either text or it's a table
Right.
or it's a plot, but it all is coming from the same data. So I know it's always going to sort of match and align.
Yeah, and the other thing I'll add onto that is there's so much less likely to be error from simple copying and pasting if you were to do this manually. Just assuming your code is written correctly, it's going to automatically output the most recent date. Whereas if you were manually updating the website every day, certainly one day at least you would forget to
Yeah.
update the date and it would be off. So this
And
is a
I
great
think
way to do
the
that.
other side of that coin is that sometimes you have to get a little creative with like how you do it, because this is templated. Um, you might need to, I think somewhere in the site, if there's like one case, I want to print the word case. If there's more than one case, I want to say cases, things like that, that like when you're building a template, you have to sort of consider.
Yeah, that actually brings up something that I made a note of. So hold on, let me remember. This is on the index page. So you are actually dynamically creating some text, deaths change text. And then let me find the next place. So you say it here in the prior 7 days. So let me go back to the so that's part of this here, where you're saying, there were 4 deaths. This is 2 more than in the prior 7 days. So you've actually done that. Whoops. Let me just refresh this page. You've actually created that here. So can you talk through what this code does on these lines and how you kind of dynamically create, the same
Yeah.
as,
Well,
more
and
than,
this
fewer
started it,
than?
I think, when I first did it. I didn't really need to, because there were like there were like always more deaths, and so it just sort of worked in a sort of
Mm,
tragically. And then there were usually more than one. But then I realized, like, grammatically, if there's less than one, or if there's more than one, or if there's like zero, I'm going to have to change what the text is around it. And so here I'm saying, uh, deaths change is just is the number of deaths that are sort of different from the day before the day. So yeah, I create it by saying how many deaths in this week minus how many deaths were there last week. That's the change. And so if the change is zero, the logic here is that it's the same number. So what I want to print is not an actual number. I don't want it to say 1 or 2 or 3. I want it to actually say the same number, like literally in text. Um, and then if there's more deaths this week than last week, I want it to say more than, and then the number, or the number and then more than. So that's line 51. If deaths change is more than 0, I want what's actually outputted to say 2 more than.
right. Right.
Um,
Exactly what you
and
have
yeah, so
here.
that's some of that's like the trade-off you have to make when you're creating essentially a template. You have to sort of think about all the different possible values that the variables that are coming in could take, and then how
Right.
do I have to handle it? And like, do I care? Like, do you really care if it says 1 cases versus 1 case? Like, you can write in some logic that will do that, or you can just sort of let it go.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Well, that's a really good overview of kind of using inline R code and doing it in a kind of more complex way here that allows you to have it update dynamically depending on the data. Um, is there anything else? So I want to talk about how this is all automated. Anything else on the code for the website itself that you think would be good to
Um,
discuss?
let's see. Can you can you pull up the municipality RMD? if I'm remembering correctly, there's a plot here that uses crosstalk, I think. We'll have to check the code, how I actually made this. But this is an example of where I wanted to sort of
Okay.
have a little bit more interaction. And again, this is like, for someone who's like writes JavaScript, this is easy to do. For me, not so much. But so what I
Sure.
wanted was some additional interaction where you could search for a specific town in this text box, and then it would highlight it in the Plotly chart below. And there's a couple different
Uh-huh.
ways to do that in R. One of them is the crosstalk package, which lets you sort of link a UI with different chart elements. And some of it is actually built into Plotly. Um,
Hmm.
and honestly, yeah.
So this
So I
is where you're
created three
creating
plots,
those three. Looks like you make,
and now here's where
uh,
it's actually happening.
is that,
Uh,
that's what does it?
yeah,
Seems
yeah.
like
But
that
I'm trying to
does it,
remember
but
where's the actual where I define the text box. Oh, I have two different versions of this because so when you it's dynamic. So actually, when you make the window narrow or the plots like flip on top of each other, um,
oh, I
eventually I think they
gotcha.
will. Yeah, there they go.
Yeah,
Anyway, I think crosstalk and other similar things are just additional like features built into R packages that let you do more interaction. Um, again, like from
yeah,
someone writing R code and not someone who's like a front end JavaScript person.
sure. All right, cool. So we've seen kind of how, you have all these R Markdown documents in the site directory. When they all get rendered, they end up, each one gets converted into an HTML file. And that's what lives here. Um, let's talk about, well, first of all, let's talk about how this is hosted. You mentioned you use GitHub Pages before. Um, how does that work? Because when you look at stuff on, like, even if I look at, for example, if I go into, or no, sorry, not that, the docs directory, I can see their HTML files, but if I look at them, it doesn't actually show me the rendered version. It just shows me the source code. So what's the process like
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I
for
mean,
hosting it?
GitHub has made it really easy to integrate hosting of static HTML into GitHub. And so this is like what we were talking about earlier, like all of the code and all of the data, all the HTML, the CSS, the JavaScript, anything you need to generate and display this website is built into these HTML files. And so in a given repository, you can turn on GitHub Pages. And what that will do is take the HTML files that in your repository in a particular directory, and then essentially deploy them publicly hosted. And you can set, I think it'll give you a default domain that's more or less, that's like similar to the repository site, or you can set it to use a custom domain, which I do here. But the actual hosting is happening on GitHub servers. And
Gotcha.
I don't think you can see it because you're not like a member of this repository, but on mine, I have another tab, where I
Right.
can go into settings and go into GitHub pages and, select which directory in my repository has the HTML files. And so in this particular version, I
Gotcha.
just decided to put them in a directory called docs. And so every time there's a update to the repository, it looks in that docs folder. And if the HTML files have changed, it builds them again.
Gotcha. So I just brought up a site that I have GitHub Pages set up on, and I can see, it's building it based on, in this case, the master branch. It's looking in the docs folder, and then it publishes by default at that URL. But like you said, you added a custom thing that
Exactly.
you
Yeah.
can.
And it's like it's really sort of a couple clicks and you got a website. It's really nice. And like I said, it's all tied into the Git commits. So if I make a change on locally on my computer to the code, push that up to GitHub, GitHub Pages is going to know, oh, okay, there's like been a change. I'm going to redeploy this HTML. And now like 30 seconds later, my site is live with everything that it was just changed locally.
Cool. So last thing I want to talk through, and this actually gets quite complicated, so probably won't go into like the details of it, but the way your website works, you're not going in every day and like running code. It's running on its own. So can you talk through
Yeah.
how that
Well,
happens?
it is sometimes, and it's sometimes. So basically, in the sh folder, this has a couple of super simple like shell scripts. So let's just take a look at download update Westchester. Um, so this is like the simplest possible script here, but it's on lines 3 and 4. I refer to some of the other scripts R scripts that we talked about. So that first one on line 3 is this R script that will go to the county website, pull the recent municipality cases, do some data wrangling, and save it as a CSV file. And that second R script actually builds the whole distill site. It essentially just like calls like render create website or render R Markdown. And so if build site, that's the name of it from the distill package.
Gotcha.
So the way I had it set up initially was I had these shell scripts running on my computer locally, actually, and triggering like a couple times a day automatically. And at that point, I was using like an old laptop, Windows laptop I had, and just using like Windows task scheduler, like really simple to say at 3 p.m. and at 6 p.m. every day, run this shell script. And then if that happens, it goes and looks for new data. And there's a little logic in the script that says to check if there's new data or not. And if there isn't, just like sort of keep waiting and keep checking every 30 minutes or an hour. And then when you're done with that, save that. Then line 4 will actually rebuild the site with the fresh data because the CSV files have changed now. And then line 6 and 7, like will automatically write a Git commit and then push it up to GitHub. And then the GitHub pages that we just talked about will take over and we have the fresh website. So that's sort of the automation I had. It's like you could do a version of this actually fully within GitHub, which I didn't have set up, like using GitHub Actions. So you could have this set up to actually run the whole process.
So do you still just run it on
Yeah,
on
and
your local
actually
computer?
it's like sort of embarrassing, but I
On
had
a script or on a
the
schedule?
original computer I had when I was developing this, I had like the task scheduler and like the scripts all set up to run a couple times a day. And then I got a new computer and I haven't set up the like automatic updates, and like the sort of urgency of COVID has changed. So actually like a couple times a week, I just like run those manual. But the nice thing though is I can still just like pop open a little like a terminal or command prompt and run those two shell scripts will do the whole thing. And they reference all the files and all the whole workflow that we just talked about just from those.
Right. Cool. That's great. I mean, no, obviously this is like a very kind of complex setup where, different things are happening. I think though, just to highlight for people, like you don't have to necessarily get this complex to just be able to do some, simple reporting using a website and taking advantage of the things that a website can offer, that kind of interactivity, allowing, also I think you do a really good job of showing how you can just kind of change the website as the data changes. Being able, like I'm thinking about people who do survey research. If you put together a website and maybe it doesn't live online, maybe it just lives on some internal place where people can go and just see the results of a survey as data comes in and it can just automatically update. It's just a really nice way to be able
100%.
to
And actually,
report.
yeah, I built a similar, less complex website for a recent survey that we're doing at work that uses Qualtrics. And so results come in, people fill out
Hmm.
this survey in Qualtrics every day. I hit the Qualtrics API using the Qualtrics package, download the data, clean the data, save the data, and then the next process is generate an R Markdown site. So that workflow is exactly the same, and it's for this other application of exactly what you said, having up-to-date survey results in like an easier to digest form. So my colleagues, they don't have to like dig through the Qualtrics results or the like Excel files that you can export manually from Qualtrics. They can just like go to this website and see
Right.
in the last day, this is the most up-to-date result. So I think it's a really powerful communication format. And the last thing I'll say is that because these are all static HTML, if you don't have any hosting or you need something to be private, you can just attach these to an email, and you can attach an HTML file to an
Mm.
email, send it to your colleague. They can download it and like open it on their computer. And that's something that we ended up doing at my past job because we were working with a lot of sensitive data and we didn't have like an easy way to deploy it securely. Um,
Right. Right.
so it's just like a PDF file, but then it's a website.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I think a lot of people don't realize necessarily that you can do that. So, I mean, you could basically just kind of like zip together this whole directory here, the docs directory, and send that to someone, and they could just open up the index.html, and they see the
Exactly.
exact same
Yeah. And you,
thing
you could
as
even go
this.
one step further. R Markdown has the option to create a self-contained HTML file, and then it would have all the JavaScript
Mm,
libraries needed, like zipped up within that, essentially written into that one HTML file that you could email to someone.
right. Um, cool. Well, this is great. Is there anything else, Matt, that I didn't ask you about that you want to highlight?
I don't think so. I mean, one nice thing also about this format, in the about page here, I have like links to all the little bit about each data set that I used and links to all the data sources. And again, this is just
Mm,
like, this isn't fancy stuff, but this actually uses R Markdown too to tell you here at a glance, like the most recent date it was updated. So if you scroll down, like some of these data sets haven't been
right.
updated in like months or a year. I think there's one about racial disparities that the New York State Department of Health stopped updating. Um, yeah. So
Yeah.
again, it's just like you can build the visualizations, and then you can also build little text elements like this with links and all the great stuff that why we love the web. And all this is built in R, and I think it's a really powerful way to really like gather and aggregate lots of data and then like host it one place, but then you can sort of send people back out as needed.
Yeah. Great. I think that's a really good place to end on. Well, Matt, thanks for joining me today. Is there, or if people want to connect with you, what would be the best
Yeah,
place for them
I
to do
have a
that?
very limited presence on Twitter. um, Buddy Herms is my Twitter handle, and I have a very out of date personal website that is built potentially using Distill, that I should update.
Well, good. Well, you should watch this video later on. It'll
I
show
will.
you
I
how to
will.
do that. All right. Well, thanks
Thank
again,
you.
Matt, for joining me. I appreciate it.